Pressure is building within the Liberal Party to remove 2 MPs from caucus. Anxieties grew late last week when Jody Wilson-Raybould submitted a recorded phone call with Canada's top bureaucrat, Michael Wernick, to the Justice Committee. We'll have more on the content of that call in a moment when we talk to Minister Karina Gold. But first, we're going to get the latest reaction from the Hill. Remember, both Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott resigned from Cabinet over alleged efforts by the Prime Minister's office to pressure the former Attorney General to intervene in the SNC-Lavalin criminal case. The CBC's Katie Simpson has been watching today's developments and joins us now. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
How divided is caucus over this?
Deeply, and we're starting to hear more people who are frustrated. A lot of the time, some Liberal MPs or some MPs, whichever party you're part of, they're hesitant to criticize their own. But after Friday's release of that new information, including that 17-minute phone call, we're certainly hearing more Liberals grow frustrated. And it is to the point where CBC News has confirmed yesterday there was a phone call among the caucus management, the caucus executive, to discuss next steps and what on earth are they going to do. I can also confirm, sources confirmed to CBC News, that there have been a number of high-level phone calls between regional caucus chairs and their members. Also, caucus groups that don't normally meet are meeting. The Women's Caucus Group is meeting tonight. The Rural Caucus Group, which normally does meet on Mondays, it is meeting tonight. And at the top of the agenda, what I've heard from sources and what our colleagues in this office have heard is that the number one issue at the top of the agenda is what to do about Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott. As you mentioned, this is the first day back in Ottawa since that tape was released, since that new evidence was submitted. And so reaction is very divided among Liberals about what they should do.
I am angry. I am angry to think in this country, Canada, a Privy councillor, the top political position in the country, sitting around a cabinet table, will actually take and tape a conversation. And in my listening to it, I felt she had to be reading from a script at times to try and draw out, to make the clerk and the Prime Minister and cabinet colleagues and us that sit in caucus with her look bad. Of course I'm angry.
I would like to move forward with Ms. Philpott and Ms. Wilson-Raybould in our caucus as contributors. Welcome and moving forward with us to talk about how we can continue the work we're doing.
I must just say that she must think of what she has done and make sure that ultimately she can defend that was ethical for her as a lawyer.
Some MPs are openly calling for there to be an emergency discussion before Wednesday's main caucus meeting to discuss what they should do and to make a decision here. Are they going to act and remove them from caucus, or are they going to allow them to stay?
And what about the opposition? What are they saying about this?
The opposition is ready, willing, and able to try and exploit those divisions. If anyone is kicked out of caucus, you are very likely going to hear from the opposition the line of, they're speaking the truth, they're whistleblowers, and this is what you do, you kick them out of caucus. So that is one line of attack that the opposition sort of has lined up, and the Liberals are well aware of the optics around this. I suspect there is a lot of concern around that. The other issue is that the Conservatives have promised to use every tool in their legislative toolbox to try and bring attention to what's going on, and that is exactly what's been happening in the House of Commons. Pierre Poilievre, who is the Conservative finance critic, he has vowed to do a one-man filibuster to try and put pressure on the Liberals to reopen the Justice Committee investigation. He has the option through Parliament. He is allowed to stand up and respond, and he can respond for up to 4 days because there's no time limit on how long the opposition can respond to the budget debate. And so the days that are set aside for budget debate, he says he's going to stand there and talk and talk and talk. Have a listen.
We're not going to allow you to bury the truth. We are going to stand here and we are going to speak up, and we are going to use every tool in the parliamentary toolkit to end the Prime Minister's cover-up and get to the truth. And their willingness to sacrifice.
And you can see right there is Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative finance critic, who is continuing to go live. And so this is not going to go overnight or anything. We're not going to have another overnight vote-a-thon, what we saw before. But the opposition, well within the rules, there's no time limit to how long they can respond. I've heard it can go as long as 4 days or 3 days. I've heard sort of both. So it's how many days are allotted to budget response. So it's going to be a very long one in the House of Commons. Pierre Pierre Poilievre. He's going to try and push the Conservative point. Whether the Liberals care to respond to that, up to them, but it's certainly going to be a very interesting week here in Ottawa.
The House is back with a bang. Thank you, Katie. CBC's Katie Simpson with the latest on that. So when will Liberals decide on the fate of Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, and how will the government attempt to move forward after this controversy? Karina Gold is the Minister of Democratic Institutions, and she joins me now from the House foyer. Hi, Minister Gold. Great to see you. Thanks for your time.
Hi, Vashi.
I want to read to you what your caucus colleague Wayne Long said following the release of the audio recording Jody Wilson-Raybould made of the conversation that she had back in December with Michael Wernick. Mr. Long said, quote, "The recording was surprising. Once, though, you move past the should she have or shouldn't she have, it certainly did, show that there was pressure and an attempt to push for the DPA." Do you agree with your colleague?
Well, I think one of the important things to note is that she recorded someone without their knowledge. And it was very clear that she knew she was recording a conversation and the other person didn't. There are a lot of questions around the ethics and the appropriateness of doing such a thing, particularly as a Privy Councillor, particularly with the public service. Let's remember that the public service's motto is fearless advice and loyal implementation. We need to have spaces in which we can have frank conversations, in which the public service can provide a fulsome picture and provide different points of view. And the very fact of recording that conversation with Canada's top public servant, I think, is very, very concerning.
Yeah, I take your point that there are questions around the ethics of that, but my question was whether you agree with your colleague Wayne Long that it does appear that there was pressure. I mean, we hear in the conversation Mr. Wernick say he's one moment, he's quite determined, quite firm, talking about the Prime Minister. He is in a very firm mood. He is in a pretty firm frame of mind about this, so I'm a bit worried. It is not a good idea for the Prime Minister and his Attorney General to be at loggerheads. Can you understand how your former cabinet colleague, Ms. Wilson-Raybould, would have felt pressured?
So, Vashi, as I have said in many interviews, as cabinet ministers, we feel pressure. There are a lot of difficult issues that we deal with every single day. Part of a democracy is having difficult conversations. It's having robust conversations about public policy and about making decisions on behalf and for Canadians. This job is not about me as a minister. It's about 37 million Canadians and making sure that we're taking decisions that are in their best interests. That is part of the nature of the job of being a cabinet minister.
So even if, from her perspective, she was acting in the capacity of Attorney General, right, which she clearly viewed as different from her capacity of Minister of Justice. Can you understand how hearing that he is in a firm mood, he's in a pretty firm frame of mind about this, it's not a good idea for the Prime Minister and the Attorney General to be at loggerheads? Can you understand how she would perceive that as veiled threats?
So I'm not going to put myself in her shoes. She's the only one who can speak on her behalf. All I can do is speak from my own experience, in which there are many different issues on which I have had disagreements and agreements, where we've put all of our facts and all of our issues on the table. One of the things that I can say for the way that this Prime Minister operates is that he wants to hear different points of view. He wants to hear different opinions, and you can have a conversation with him about those things. And so I think that Canadians, what they expect of us as members of Parliament, as politicians, as cabinet ministers, is to make sure that we're looking at all sides of the story. And I think that they would expect that we're having these robust conversations, because ultimately, you know, I, as a cabinet minister, don't know everything. I should be looking for opinions from a wide variety of sources to make sure that I've heard all the different points of view, so that I'm coming to a decision that is really reflective and hopefully what's best for Canadians.
So am I correct in interpreting that as saying you don't think that Jody Wilson-Raybould did that?
What I'm saying is that my role as a cabinet minister is to make sure that I'm listening to all different points of view. And, you know, Canadians watched the over 4 hours of testimony when she testified at the Justice Committee. They have now seen the evidence and heard the evidence, and they can make those decisions for themselves. My role as a cabinet minister, and anyone else who's in this position, because, you know, there have been people who have been in this position before me, there'll be people in this position after me, it's to make sure that we're, you know, canvassing as widely as possible, listening to different points of view, engaging in difficult conversations, having those really tough conversations and robust debates on policy issues to get to the best, hopefully, solution.
Even if it amounts to political interference, though?
Well, I think this is a really important question to be asking. And the question is if you're having conversations, if you're asking for advice, if you're asking for different points of view, then that's a robust debate. That's a robust policy conversation that we're having. And I think part of it, again, is, Canadians can make that decision for themselves. They have heard a lot of testimony. They've heard from all parties involved, all members involved in this issue, and they can make that decision for themselves.
Both Mr. Wernick and the Prime Minister, to bolster the government's case, said often that, there were multiple occasions for the former minister, referring to Jody Wilson-Raybould, to raise concerns about whether she felt pressure. And Mr. Wernick testified that she did not. The Prime Minister said that she did not, except we hear over and over in this conversation, she says it is entirely inappropriate and it is political interference. I cannot act in a partisan way. I cannot be politically motivated. All of this screams that. I actually really feel uncomfortable having this conversation because it is wrong. How would that not have been transferred to, clearly she's raising that issue.
Right. So one thing that I would say is that the Prime Minister's office did release a statement on Friday that was confirmed by the clerk that conversation was not relayed to the Prime Minister. That's an important fact to remember and to put on the table. The other thing that I would remind you and viewers is that this conversation was recorded. Only one party knew that it was being recorded. The other didn't. And the other fact of the matter is that this tape was also not released until Friday, when when Jody she testified at the Justice Committee. It was not disclosed that she had taped this conversation. There are some real questions around that, and personally, as a cabinet minister who relies on really frank conversations with the public service, who are providing advice to us as to how we should make decisions and what the legalities are and what the information required is to make those decisions, that is a real breach of trust and confidence, and something that I think we should be really concerned about, because,
Do you think she should remain in caucus as a result?
That's a conversation that caucus will be having, but I think that it's very concerning. As a Privy Councillor, our job is to uphold the government of Canada and the decisions that we take, and to really Canadians should be able to trust that we're having these really important conversations, and the fact that you can have them in confidence. Vashi, how would you feel if a colleague of yours recorded a conversation that you had and then released it publicly?
Well, I kind of operate under the assumption that could happen anytime, but that's I take your point.
But not on TV, right?
I take your point,
yeah.
but does that mean that she should remain in caucus? And you're saying that's a discussion for caucus to have. Many of your caucus colleagues have spoken out today, saying no, saying yes. What is your take? Do you still trust Ms. Wilson-Raybould? Do you want her to remain in caucus?
Well, it's a conversation that is ongoing, and it's something that will be discussed, at caucus, I imagine, and we'll have to see what the results of that are.
So you don't have. You're very much saying that what she did was unethical. You're saying you have concerns about it, but you won't go so far to say she should not be in caucus.
I think this has to be a decision for caucus.
And finally, you said that the Prime Minister's office, as you rightly pointed out, said on Friday that they were never briefed on this, or the Prime Minister himself, was not briefed on this conversation. Was anyone in his office briefed on the conversation with Mr. Wernick?
So you would have to ask someone else that, because I'm not privy to that conversation. But what I can say, and what I'm sure you know and viewers know, is that Mr. Wernick himself also confirmed that he did not brief the Prime Minister as well.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Minister Gold. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
It is totally inappropriate to record without notifying the other person. It is not an honorable thing to do.
I think the reason why Jody Wilson-Raybould had to record this extraordinary conversation is because she knew that Trudeau and his team would lie and deny. It turns out she was right.
The reality is you can tape a conversation, but you should never tape it without getting full knowledge and permission from the person you're taping. And that tells me that we have a real problem, that I don't feel safe in caucus, and so I would want caucus to act.
Depending on who you ask, what Jody Wilson-Raybould did was either unethical or courageous. Her recording of her conversation with Canada's top public servant at the time and her release of it to the Justice Committee has some Liberal MPs questioning her future inside caucus. Wilson-Raybould was both Attorney General and Justice Minister when she recorded the phone call with the Clerk of the Privy Council, Wernick. Did she legally commit any wrongdoing? Kenneth Jewell is a lawyer at Gardner-Roberts and a law professor at the University of Toronto. He testified as a witness before the Justice Committee on remediation agreements, and Mr. Jewell joins us now from Toronto. Hi there, great to see you again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So as we just heard, there are a lot of Liberals condemning Jody Wilson-Raybould's secret audio tape as inappropriate and not, quote unquote, not an honorable thing to do. Her defenders say it simply backed up her testimony before the Justice Committee and shows she was worried about how things would play out. Can we start from a legal standpoint? Was it legal?
So there's a number of layers here. Let's start with the criminal code. It is okay in the criminal code if there are two people in a conversation, if one of those two people records that conversation. That is not illegal. It's only illegal if two people are having a conversation and a third person intercepts that. So criminal code says it's legal. The next step we have to look at is the two hats that Minister, at the time, Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould was wearing. She was the senior law officer of the Crown in her role as the Attorney General. In that capacity, as a lawyer, if you look at it that way, the Law Society, certainly in Ontario, says one ought not to record a conversation with a client unless the client consents. But there's another hat she was wearing, which was that of the Minister of Justice. And in that capacity, if you view it that way, her conversation with the clerk was almost a conversation between colleagues and not a solicitor-client type of arrangement. Now, normally, if I was interviewing a witness, I would say, I don't have somebody here to take notes, but I would like your permission to tape the conversation. Here's where it gets difficult and tricky. Now, Ms. Wilson-Raybould has said that she had reason to believe that it was likely to be an inappropriate conversation. And therefore, based on that belief, she made the decision to tape the conversation. So one could see that as a type of gathering of evidence or a defensive mechanism. And that then leads to the issue, which is really at the center of this whole issue, and that is, was this inappropriate? And we come back to something that I said on the last time I was on your show. There are two roads that one can go down. The question is, we don't really know which road they were going down. And one of the reasons is we don't know what the reasons for denying the remediation agreement were.
That's actually, I thought that actually stuck out to me as well during the call, because they talked about that Section 13 notice, which essentially, I believe, spelled out for the former Attorney General why the DPP didn't proceed with that. And I'm just wondering, is there any way in which the public will become apprised of that? Like, I understand that there's a could be a criminal trial coming up. Is there any way for the public to become aware of why the Director of Public Prosecution decided against pursuing a remediation agreement?
So it is a bit like, if you think about it, it's like we're watching an aviation council review the recovery of a black box and conversations about a black box, but we don't know what's in the black box.
Totally.
The legal question you've asked is interesting. Under the DPPA Act, and we've heard a lot about this in this case, the Attorney General presently, today, could direct the public prosecutor to reveal the reasons for not giving the remediation agreement. I think the only caveat to that would be you would have to get the consent of the accused, which is SNC-Lavalin, because they would have to consent. Now, this is a very unique case because SNC-Lavalin, number one, is on record that they want a remediation agreement, and number two, they themselves sought, by way of a judicial review, the reasons.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not...
Which they were denied.
Right. Now, whether or not they would think that the reasons would become public or not is a different issue, because they may have wanted to see the reasons but not shared them. So they would have to consent. But if they consented, then in that situation, the Attorney General could order that the reasons be released. I've recently written that I think that's what we need to do, because it's
just going to ask, do you think that that's kind of crucial at this point?
It's so difficult. I mean, as I said, we talked last time about the right road of protecting innocent employees versus the wrong road of considering the national economic interest. We really don't know, among all the discussions we've heard so far, what sections of the Act were discussed in detail. We don't know the specifics of the particulars that were discussed. We have generalities, but we really haven't heard enough of the specifics because there's all this discussion about this decision that we can't see. And we know the Prime Minister's office has the Section 13 reasons.
Well, we don't know for sure, actually, because I mean, yeah, she said that she passed them on, but then that they claimed that they didn't have them. I've asked, actually, at the Prime Minister's office. They said they're looking into it from.
Okay.
But you're absolutely, but that is, it seems pretty central.
Right.
We'll see. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Jewell. Really appreciate your time and insight again this evening.
Questions, but hopefully they'll be answered.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.